Welcome to American Old West Tales. In the untamed wilderness of the American Southwest, the U.S. Army faced a relentless enemy, one that knew the land better than any soldier. Among those who dared to confront the fierce Apache warriors was a young lieutenant named Howard Cushing. His name may not echo as loudly as some, but his bravery and the brutal fight that claimed his life tell a tale as riveting as any of the annals of the Old West. From chasing outlaws to battling a deadly ambush in the mountains of Arizona, Cushing's fate would forever be sealed in the unforgiving frontier. This is the story of a forgotten hero, a man whose final moments defined an era of fierce struggle and survival. Join us as we uncover the legacy of Lieutenant Howard Cushing.
During the dark days of the Apache Campaigns in the late 1860s and early 1870s, many officers of the Frontier Army showed courage, but few matched the bravery of Lieutenant Howard Cushing. He came from a renowned family of American war heroes, which included his brothers, Milton Jr., Alonzo, and John Cushing. Their father, Dr. Milton Cushing Sr., earned his medical degree and settled in Zanesville, Ohio, where he married his first wife, Abigail. They had 4 children before she passed away in 1833. 3 years later, he married Mary Smith, and together they had 5 children: Milton Jr., Howard, Alonzo, John, and Mary. Dr. Cushing died of tuberculosis in 1847, leaving Mary widowed and struggling to raise 9 children. Abigail's children were nearly grown, but Milton Jr. and Howard took on work to help support the family. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, all 4 of Mary's sons joined the Union cause. Tragically, Mary would outlive all of them. Alonzo Cushing, a West Point graduate, was killed at Cemetery Ridge during the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 and posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. At West Point, he was buried. John Cushing, a graduate of the Naval Academy, led a daring commando raid on October 27th to 28th, 1864, sinking the Confederate ironclad CSS Albemarle. His health declined, and he passed away in 1874, being buried at the Naval Academy. Howard Cushing had already built a reputation as a relentless Indian fighter before arriving in Arizona. During the Cochise War, he became the Army's most determined and successful soldier, leading countless scouting missions throughout Apache. He had a natural ability to lead, earning the admiration of his troopers, who were willing to charge hell with a bucket of water for him. Fellow officers also held him in the highest regard. His fighting prowess kept him in the field constantly, always ready to pursue when needed. Captain John G. Bourke, who served alongside him in the 3rd Cavalry, praised him in On the Border with Crook, calling him the bravest man I ever saw. In early 1871, Troop F had several encounters with the Apache, raiding their rancherias in the Pinal and Santa Catalina Mountains. They burned wickiups, destroyed supplies, and forced the Apache to flee into harsh winter conditions. They also attacked 2 more settlements north of the Gila, burning out the Apache and inflicting heavy losses. This aggressive young lieutenant caught the attention of Apache leaders like Cochise, Geronimo, and Jew. By spring of 1871, he was ordered to move Troop F 3rd Cavalry from Camp Grant on the lower San Pedro River to Fort Lowell on Relito Creek near Tucson. There he met Governor Apache Safford, who gave him the authority to conduct search and destroy missions, scouring the mountains and valleys of southeastern Arizona. The Cushing's patrol set out from Camp Grant on August 26th with a group that included Sergeant Tom Mott, 16 privates, and William Simpson, Cushing's English friend who served as the chief civilian packer. Their mission was to scout the Sonoita and Santa Cruz valleys, as well as the mountains near the Mexican border. Cushing believed Cochise was behind much of the violence in southeastern Arizona and made it his personal goal to capture him. The patrol headed southeast, reaching Cienega Ranch, the site of the old Butterfield stage station about 30 miles east of Tucson and 3 miles west of Pantano. The following day, they rode south to Camp Crittenden on Sonoita Creek, arriving late in the afternoon. After covering 65 miles in 2 days, Cushing decided to give the horses and pack mules a day's rest. On April 30th, they left Camp Crittenden and rode south to Pete Kitchen's ranch at Potrero, just north of present-day Nogales. Kitchen, known as one of the Southwest's most famous Indian fighters, had turned his ranch into a fortress. Located along one of the Apache raiding trails into Mexico, his stronghold had seen so many failed attempts by the Apaches to destroy it that they eventually avoided the area entirely. At 5 a.m. on May 1st, Troop F broke camp. Kitchen volunteered to guide them through the rugged mountains between the Sonoita and Santa Cruz valleys. The troop headed south, crossed into Mexico, and spent the night at the Presidio in Santa Cruz. There, Cushing learned from the Mexican comandante that Apaches had recently been spotted just north of the border in the Huachuca Mountains. They set up camp at Cienega on the east side of the Huachuca Mountains, where they quickly spotted signs of Apache activity. The troopers couldn't help but notice the Apache signal fires that tracked their movements, making it clear that Cushing's small band was being watched. While Cushing was focused on capturing or killing Cochise, the Apaches had their own plans. They were targeting Lieutenant Cushing, setting an ambush for him in the Whetstone Mountains. May 4th, the troop moved north along the eastern side of the Huachucas and made camp that night at Canyon Alisos, south of the Babacomari River. Grass was scarce as the Apaches had been burning the land, leaving the area barren. The next morning, May 5th, they broke camp at 7 a.m. and rode northwest toward the old Camp Wallen on the Babacomari River, where Cushing intended to stop. However, the grass had been entirely burned off and was still smoldering. Cushing chose instead to head for Bear Springs in the Whetstones, unaware that Apache warriors led by Jew were lying in wait. About 2 miles north of Camp Wallen, they came across a small trail leading into the Whetstone Mountains. Cushing sent Sergeant Mott and 3 men to follow the trail while he led the rest of the troop along the main path. Sergeant Mott's written account details the next events. I followed the trail for about 3/4 of a mile until it led into a canyon, which was basically a deep arroyo. I noticed that the squaw walking ahead had taken great care to leave clear footprints with each step, avoiding stones and rocks to do so. This made me certain we were being lured into a trap, so I decided to leave the canyon. Just as I reached the top of the left wall, my suspicions were confirmed. A group of about 15 Indians were hiding in a side canyon and would have blocked our retreat if I had continued on the trail. From my vantage point, I thought with 2 men we could hold them off while a third went to signal Lieutenant Cushing to turn back. As we dismounted to prepare for the fight, I saw a second, larger group of Indians moving towards our rear. When I realized what was happening, I thought we should turn back, but as we mounted up, the Indians fired, killing Private Green's horse and seriously wounding Private Pierce. Green and Pierce tried to retreat on foot, with the Indians in close pursuit. One even got close enough to snatch Green's hat off his head. The third man, who had gone to signal Lieutenant Cushing, looked back and saw our predicament. He fired at the Indians, which must have made them think the main troop had arrived, causing them to hesitate just long enough for us to escape. The front line of Apaches, having fired their rifles, didn't bother to reload but kept chasing us, likely intending to capture us alive. They could have easily killed us. They surrounded us with breech-loading rifles and revolvers, though a few in the second line kept up a steady, though ineffective fire. Lieutenant Cushing, along with Packer Simpson, armed with a Henry repeating rifle that held 15 rounds, and Private Chapman joined Sergeant Mott and Private Green, who had managed to escape his pursuers. With the rest of Troop F, they now had 11 men in total. Despite this, they were still vastly outnumbered, facing odds of 15-1. After a brief skirmish, the Apaches retreated into the hills, losing 5 men while Troop F lost 3 horses. Cushing ordered him to go forward and the 3 soldiers to return to the pack train. Both Simpson and Mott advised against crossing open ground, as the enemy had the advantage of cover, but Cushing, ever the determined and daring soldier, believed the Apaches had been defeated. He counted his remaining men. 8 should be plenty, he suggested. The Apaches started fire when they were around 20 yards away. A bullet struck Simpson fatally in the head. Cushing sent a man to bring him back, but when the Apaches realized the group was down to 6 men, they launched their own charge. Cushing was hit in the chest, and as Mott and Private Fichter tried to drag him to safety, another shot hit him in the head. Simpson was struck again, and as Green tried to mount his horse, he too was fatally wounded. With no choice, Mott had to leave the bodies of Cushing, Simpson, and Green behind as he and the remaining troopers fought for their lives in a desperate running gunfight. Mott managed to recover Cushing's revolvers and Simpson's Henry rifle before escaping. Troop F made it back to Camp Crittenden later that evening. 2 days after the fight in the Whetstone Mountains, 3 cavalry troops arrived at the scene. Geronimo, and their group had by then safely fled to the Sierra Madre. Lieutenant Cushing paid the ultimate price after falling into the ideal trap that they had laid for him. Lieutenant John Bourke was tasked with the grim duty of burying the mutilated remains where they had fallen, after coyotes, crows, and buzzards had scavenged them. Lieutenant Cushing's bones were subsequently reburied at the Presidio in San Francisco, after first being placed at Fort Lowell, which is close to Tucson. For his bravery, Sergeant Mott was awarded the Medal of Honor.